My name is Sabrina Townsend, and I'm 28 years old. Christmas at Grandma Eleanor's house always meant three things: the smell of cinnamon rolls burning slightly on the bottom, my Uncle Ray arguing about football before the turkey even hit the table, and the kind of loud, crowded chaos that made you feel both overwhelmed and deeply loved at once. That year, 2023, I'd driven 4 hours from my apartment in Columbus to be there. I was broke, worn down by a job that barely covered rent, and honestly unsure I even wanted to make the trip. My car's check engine light had been glowing at me for 6 weeks. My credit card was maxed out. But Grandma Eleanor had called me herself, not a group text, not a message relayed through my mom. She called me directly, and when she said, "Baby, I need you here this year," I packed a bag that same night. Grandma Eleanor was 79, sharp as a tack, and the kind of woman who'd built everything from nothing. She'd grown up in rural Georgia with dirt floors and a father who worked double shifts at a textile mill. She married my grandfather at 21, moved north, and spent the next 5 decades quietly, methodically building wealth that nobody in the family fully grasped, because she never talked about money. She drove the same 2009 Buick for 15 years. She clipped coupons. She wore the same pearl earrings to every occasion. None of us had any real idea what she was worth. Dinner was loud and warm and wonderful in that particular way only chaotic family gatherings can be. My dad, Richard, was already on his 3rd glass of wine before the rolls came out. My Aunt Patricia was complaining about her neighbor's tacky holiday lights. My cousins, 4 of them, ranging from 16 to 31, were crowded around the television watching highlights. My mom was in the kitchen helping Grandma plate desserts, and I sat at the far end of the table, feeling both part of everything and somehow invisible, the way you do when you're the one in the family who hasn't quite figured life out yet. Or at least that's how it felt to me. Then Grandma Eleanor walked out of the kitchen carrying a small wooden box. Not gift-wrapped, no bow, just a plain old box that looked like it had spent years in the back of her closet. The room went quiet in that instinctive way it does when an elder moves with purpose. She set the box on the table, looked around at each of us, and said, "I've been waiting for the right time to do this. I've decided there is no right time. There's only now." She opened it. Inside were envelopes, 7 of them, one for each child and grandchild at the table. She called our names one by one and handed them out herself, circling the table slowly, pressing each envelope into our hands with both of hers. When she reached me, she held my hand just a second longer than the others. I didn't know what to make of it then. "Open them," she said, and sat back down. I opened mine carefully. Inside was a personal check, written in her loopy, old-fashioned handwriting and signed in blue ink at the bottom. I looked at the number. I looked again. $5 million. My mind couldn't process it. I kept trying to reread the commas, convinced I was misreading something. 5 million, made out to Sabrina R. Townsend. The room erupted, not in joy, but in laughter. My cousin Derek held his up and fanned himself dramatically. "Oh yeah, I'm a millionaire now." My Aunt Patricia laughed so hard she knocked over her water glass. Even my mom smiled like it was some sweet, eccentric joke from an old woman who'd had a bit too much holiday punch. Then my dad spoke. Richard Townsend, who prided himself on being the most logical person in any room, picked up his check, glanced at it, set it down flat, and said, with the kind of dismissive certainty that could crush a child's confidence in 3 seconds flat, "It's fake. Don't be an idiot." Just like that. Not "Mom, is this real?" Not "What's this about?" Just, "It's fake, don't be an idiot." And because he said it with that voice, the one that had always functioned as the final word on reality in our family, the laughter grew louder. Envelopes got tossed aside. Derek pretended to call his accountant. My uncle stuffed his back in its envelope and said, "Thanks, Mom. You had me for a second." Within 10 minutes, the checks were forgotten, and the conversation drifted back to football and whether the sweet potato casserole needed more marshmallows. I said nothing. I watched Grandma Eleanor's face through all of it. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't try to explain or defend what she'd given us. She simply picked up her fork, started on her slice of pie, and glanced at me once, just once, with an expression I didn't fully understand until the next morning. I folded my check carefully, tucked it into the inside zip pocket of my purse, and told myself I'd look at it again later. Something about the way she'd looked at me. Something about her hand lingering on mine. I barely slept that night. By 8 the next morning, I was sitting in the parking lot of Metrobrook National Bank, check in hand, feeling like the most naive person alive, but also like I had nothing left to lose. The branch on Cloverfield Avenue opened at 8:30, and I was first through the door the moment the lock clicked. I hadn't told anyone I was going, not my mom, not my dad, and definitely not my cousins. If the check was fake, I'd simply drive back to Grandma's, eat leftover cinnamon rolls, and never mention this moment to another living soul for the rest of my life. But if there was even a 1% chance it was real, I needed to know before I talked myself out of it. I walked up to the first available teller, a young woman whose name tag read Brianna, slid the check across the counter, and said as calmly as I could manage, "I'd like to deposit this, please." Brianna picked it up with the casual efficiency of someone who'd processed 1,000 checks before breakfast. She looked at it. Then looked again. Her expression didn't break, but something shifted behind her eyes, that subtle flicker people get when their brain is catching up to something unexpected. She held up one finger, said, "One moment, please," and disappeared into the back. I stood at that counter for 4 minutes. I counted. My hands were flat on the cool marble, and I counted the seconds because I needed something to focus on besides spiraling into panic or hope, two emotions colliding so hard in my chest I felt dizzy. Then a man emerged from the back office. Mid-50s, silver-haired, dressed in a pressed navy suit with a small American flag pin on the lapel. His nameplate read Gerald Hutchins, branch manager. He held my check with both hands, and his face, I will never forget this, had gone completely pale. Not nervous pale. Not confused pale. The particular pale of someone who suddenly realizes they're standing in the presence of something demanding their full, undivided professional attention. He looked at me. He looked at the check. Then, very quietly, he said, "Miss Townsend, would you come with me, please?" He led me past the teller windows, through a door marked staff only, into a private office with a glass window overlooking the main floor. He shut the door, gestured for me to sit, and then, instead of taking his seat behind the desk, pulled his chair around to my side and leaned in close. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, we need to talk." My heart stopped, completely stopped. He held the check up gently and said, "This is drawn from an account held at this branch. Eleanor May Townsend." He paused. "This account has been with our institution for over 40 years. And I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you." Another pause. "This check is real. It's entirely valid. And if you choose to deposit it today, the funds are available to clear." I heard the words. I understood each one individually. And yet my brain refused to assemble them into meaning for what felt like 10 full seconds. I just sat there staring at Gerald Hutchins as if he'd started speaking a language I hadn't learned. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "Can you say that again?" He repeated it, word for word, then added, "Your grandmother is one of the longest-standing account holders in this branch's history. She is, and I want to be careful how I put this, a woman of very substantial means. She's been quietly, methodically managing significant assets for decades. What she's given you isn't a gesture, Miss Townsend. It's a transfer of generational wealth. And it is entirely, completely legitimate." I started crying. I hadn't planned to. I wasn't someone who cried in public under normal circumstances. But something cracked open in me right there in that office, some wall that had been holding back years of financial strain, of feeling perpetually behind, of watching that check engine light glow while I skipped lunch to make rent. The tears came pouring out like they'd been waiting in line. Gerald quietly slid a box of tissues across the desk and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. When I finally pulled myself together enough to speak, my first question wasn't about the money. It was. Did she do this for everyone at the table? All 7 of us? Gerald looked at me carefully and said, I can only speak to the transaction in front of me. But I can tell you your grandmother called ahead. She wanted to make sure that anyone who came in would be received properly. He let that hang in the air. Anyone who came in, not everyone had come in. I understood immediately. My dad, who'd called it fake without a second thought. My cousins, who'd wandered off. My aunt, who'd tossed hers back in the envelope. I was, apparently, the only one sitting in that office. I was the one who'd folded my check carefully and tucked it away while everyone else performed their certainty that it meant nothing. I thought about the way Grandma Eleanor had looked at me across the table, that single glance, that lingering handhold. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she handed out those checks at a crowded Christmas dinner, in front of the loudest, most dismissive members of our family. She hadn't been confused, or sentimental, or eccentric. She'd been running a quiet test, with the patience of someone who'd spent 79 years learning exactly who people are when they think nothing is at stake. I drove back to her house that afternoon. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just smiled, that small, private smile I'd seen my whole life and never fully understood, and said, "Come inside, baby." I made cinnamon rolls. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours, and she told me things she'd never told anyone about the land she'd quietly bought back in 1987.